behind our heads, we don't really talk about it, is that the currency actually is very stable. The ringgit, the ringgit has never suffered, like the Indonesia case, the rupiah suffers the panic attacks one. Malaysia, very small scale panic attack. I don't even call it panic attack. You say you go and wait for 1 month and come back, you'll be fine. Malaysia, we never had that sort of problem. And investors, they like that. They like that certainty. But the problem that they face now is
Before we begin the podcast, have you gotten your free ebook? It's called the Build a Six-Figure Portfolio Guidebook. Now, inside it, we share with you the tips and tricks to bring your stock investing skills to the next level. The best part, it's only 10 pages long and it's totally free. Whether you're on Spotify or YouTube, the link to download is in the description, or you can go to www.firl.co/FREE or www.FIRL.co/free. Alright guys, welcome back to the podcast, Best Place for Long-Term Stock Investors. Today, we're going to get essentially an expert on the FDIs for Malaysia, specifically China and the region. This is always a hot topic for us Malaysians, right? We are an export-dependent nation. If I remember my facts correctly, we are something like 70% of our GDP are exports. So this is going to be a very important podcast for you investors to see where the money is flowing and what's happening essentially. And so today, my guest is Guanie Lim. I'd love to do the introductions, but maybe Mr. Lim, you can share with us, like, what do you do?
okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me, MJ, as well as the rest of the crew. I've been watching your program for some time. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
So what I do is that I'm a researcher at this place called National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, in Tokyo. And, I research and teach about development in economics. And my main interests are Chinese outward investments into the Global South. The Global South here means, broadly speaking, Southeast Asia. And I look at the industrial transformation aspect of this inflow of money.
Right. So why is this an area of interest, right? Because there's so many things you could be doing.
I wasn't very good at, I'm not very good at doing other things like, playing football, cooking.
Right. Okay.
And I realized that I only have a very limited amount of skills that are probably can earn some money and, not die of hunger. And then those skills are basically, looking at numbers and explaining stuff, right? Those are what I do. I wouldn't say competently, but I would say that the least bad, right? You have a list, right? And you do this thing, not so good. And you're left with this side that is not too bad or least bad. That's basically me.
Right. I mean, is your background like econs or policy related? Is it econs?
My PhD was in economic geography.
Oh.
But prior to that, my undergrad was engineering, chem eng.
Okay. So maybe I'm very interested now, like how did that switch even happen? Because chemical engineering and what you're doing is quite a bit different, no?
Actually, when I was younger, right, I don't know, I think you would concur with this at one point, right? When you were younger, you go to science stream, sub-science stream, and art stream. Malaysia is these three only, right?
Correct.
Science, sub-science, arts. And within arts, there's the huge umbrella. But those days, right, because I was so young, I didn't know what was going on. And, people say, hey, do this so that, you can go on and do a science-y degree, engineering degree, which I eventually did. And halfway through, I realized I didn't like it that much. And at the time, I had a lot of time on my hands. At the time, those days, you still go to library and read books. Not like today, you download and read.
Yes.
So I chanced upon The Economist. Those days, The Economist is not like today's Economist. It was more legit. I wouldn't say legit. It was more, the substance was was a
Now
lot
they have
more
to
lah,
sell
put it this way.
their publisher, what's the word? They have to sell their articles a bit more. That's why.
Those days it was, at least to me, I enjoy it. I would just look and read, and basically, if you come across concepts, you just find it out yourself lah. And I continued into my workplace, and then I realized that a lot of times I was basically writing speeches for the, writing reports and speeches for the higher ups.
Oh.
And then I realized that, hey, actually I was not bad at doing that. And then I look around, it's like, hey, I can actually make a living out of it. I can actually make a living out of it. And so, that time I also applied for a scholarship in Singapore. So I did my master's in economy there. And then I got another scholarship to do my PhD, also in Singapore. So that basically paved the way.
I see. So how do you, and I'm in Tokyo, which is where you are right now, right?
Oh, my previous job, I like it a lot. I like my colleagues, my ex-colleagues a lot, but I wanted to move up and the opportunity wasn't there. So these grips, they had an opening, which I think was quite good. And I applied to it and I got the job, and it was also COVID during those times.
I see.
So I waited a bit. I took almost a 6 to 8 months sabbatical in Malaysia. And then the semi-darurat period. And then I made my way to Japan only in not February. April 2022. Yes. April 2021. Sorry, April 2021.
Okay, interesting. So I mean, if I understand correctly, so you were mainly working in Singapore, and then that's when you hopped to Japan about almost 2 years ago now, right?
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so now let's get into one area I know that a lot of people globally, and then also to a slightly lesser extent Malaysia, are very interested in, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. I think 2 to 3 years ago it was huge. It was a huge hot topic, right? I think whenever the West covers it, you get a lot of skepticism. And then, of course, in this part of the world, I think, and this part of the world in Africa, there's a lot more open arms, right, for the BRI. But maybe you can share with us what are some of the latest developments in the BRI, and also how do you think that affects Malaysia specifically?
Okay. The BRI, right, Belt and Road, it was not called BRI, it was called the OBOR at one point. Yes. At one point, it was called OBOR, and then they realized that, hey, brie sounds better, but it sounds like some kind of cheese, right? Is it the Swiss cheese?
Yes, correct.
So, OBOR/BRI started in 2013, right? And as you say, there was a lot of fanfare and optimism, and then suddenly there was myths, exaggeration, and there was a lot of negative spotlight too, lah. And that was also the age of, Trumpism, lah, right? So there was a lot of all this hot air, but a lot of these things are very hard to prove, lah. And if you really look at all the documents, right, being produced by the Chinese side and other sides, right, is that you realize that the Belt and Road, right, it says a lot of things, and it doesn't really carry substance in the sense that they all sound warm and fuzzy, right? You want financial connectivity, people connectivity, right? And all these are good things. Who don't want that, right? I also want that, right? But what has transpired is that, at least within Malaysia, right, and perhaps the rest of Southeast Asia, is that the BRI is often associated with Chinese FDI/projects, right?
Yes.
I think if you live in Malaysia for the last 5 or 6 years, you probably know which projects we are talking about, lah. And they've been covered quite extensively. We won't go into detail there. But the other thing that we have to understand, right, is that if you just look at the investment sides, right?
Yes.
You realize that China has massive current account surpluses.
Yes.
As such, it is a net saver to the global economy. And by extension, it is no different from Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, and even Germany, right? These are huge current account surplus players. And if you hold all this current account surplus in your own economy, it'll be very, very difficult because you have to sterilize them, and it's not cheap lah to sterilize them.
Okay, so
So
hold
on
on
the
there
other
a
side
little.
of the
Hold on for a moment. Sorry to cut you off, but maybe you can translate for us. What does it mean for a country to have a current account surplus, and what does sterilize mean?
Okay, surplus is basically okay. Like Malaysia, we sell a lot of electronics
Stuff,
and
yep.
palm oil, right? That's where your current account surplus comes from. But when that happens, the money comes in. Some of it, not some, almost all of it, you have to hold, right? And if you hold it, you can't just take in euros and US dollar, right? You have to sterilize them, change into ringgit, so on and so forth. And if you hold all of them in your own country, right, it's gonna overheat and cause a lot of problems.
Right.
So that is where the sterilization part comes. And the other part is that you have to park it outside lah. So for a lot of economies like example Malaysia and Singapore, right, we are quite lucky. We have the sovereign wealth funds, we have the Khazanas, the GICs. So these are the big players that move it outside lah.
I see. So in China's
Yeah.
case specifically, they have something like 3 trillion in reserves, right?
Mhm.
And are they all in US dollars or in RMB or a mix?
Most of it is the T-bills that
Okay.
Wall Street always talks about lah. The
Yeah.
yield and all those lah. Most of it is that. But of course, I think over the last 2 years they've been trying to diversify, but this thing come and go lah. In the sense that where else are you going to park your money at, right?
Okay.
You can't go and buy UK bonds, right? They have their own problems, right? So in the end, you can buy gold, but how much gold can you buy?
It's a limited supply.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes. So right, continue explaining the exact problem and what's the ripple effect of this.
The other thing is that we were talking about the surplus, right? The Taiwan CJKT, the Chinese, Japanese, Korea, and Taiwanese, they all have huge current account surplus, right? And guess what? In Southeast Asia, quite a few of us are deficit countries, right? Current account deficit countries. Largely the Mekong states, largely the Mekong states. Not so much Malaysia or Singapore. We are surplus. So what happens is that you have surplus, that guy has deficit, and match made in heaven, right? So that's how you see, hey, recently there's this huge train, right, railway in Laos, right?
Okay.
Laos-China border. So that is one manifestation, and in Malaysia there's a few more lah. There's a few more.
So how about the projects? Like a lot of it has not manifested, but then we know specifically as Malaysians that there was some manifesting going on until I think Tun M decided to put a stop on the ECRL, right? And I'm not sure if the HSR is lumped into it. But maybe give us an update on that. And do you think like these projects will come back and, yeah.
I think we can look at ECRL, right? The thing about ECRL, like you mentioned just now, is Tun M very famously renegotiated in Beijing, no less.
Yeah.
And after that, it was revived under different terms. And the most recent admin, the one led by PM Anwar Ibrahim, right? He has decided to continue with it. So ever since Tun M left, right, there's been a few governments, right? And all of them chose to maintain it, correct? All of them chose to maintain it. That means that there might be some merits to it. But the reason why we use the word might is that we don't really know, because a lot of these documents, right, they are not publicly available. As far as I know, you can know maybe the length, the number of stops, right? At one point, they had it in KL Central, right? They had the demo booths, right? And finally, the Korean had one as well, probably to showcase their their technology nearby, quite a small booth. So we don't have a lot of information. So there's also some geostrategic element to it, right? If you read certain sources, they say, hey, you are cutting the streets of Malacca in half or something like that. So that is the geostrategic element, which hard to prove anyway, if you ask me. It's quite hard to prove. But the other thing that I would really want to highlight is that the fact that so many governments after Tun M came on board. Actually, it was not even Tun M who started it. It was PM Najib. This was PM Najib's baby. So the fact that all these governments chose to maintain it means that there must be some merits to it. There must be some merits to it.
And do you think that we are likely to get it and we are likely to restart everything, or it's still going to take a while?
It's still going to take a while because the thing with these type projects, right? You have to buy land, clear land, right? You have to buy land, clear land, and then actually implement it. And I think it's ongoing. It's ongoing, and it will take probably a few more years now. And the other counterparty, a few years earlier than us, was actually the Jakarta Bandung HSR. That is closer to completion.
Wow. Okay. Okay. We will talk about the regional stuff a bit later on, but maybe going back to BRI, right? So, if what you're saying is that there's more talk than walk, why have they been called out yet? And like, what is the implication of all this lack of activity, I guess?
I think if you look at just Chinese investments, let's not talk about loans and all those, because a lot of these HSRs, right? They are usually concessions. They are usually concessions. The one that was first offered to PM Najib was actually just EPCC straight away. There's no long-term ownership, right? And the one negotiated by our two Tuns, Tun Daim and Tun Mahathir, is that is a joint venture company, so that it's a long-term stake. So on that, you have to thank the both of them On that, you have to thank the both of them. So in that sense, right, there is the loans part and there's the investments part, right? And there's investment part, right? We are talking about long-term investments. There have been quite a few going on. Some are high profile, some are not so high profile. And a lot of the good ones, they tend not to generate headlines because it's a good one. What's there to talk about, right?
That's true.
So
well, some of these good ones, maybe you can share with us that has happened.
The good ones are actually quite a lot. They are quite a lot. There's one in I think this place, Kuching. Yeah, Kuching. There's this company called Longi, right? Longi is a solar panel player, right? So it's quite a big employer in the state of Sarawak. And prior to those guys entering, Malaysia was not a significant player in the solar panel industry.
Interesting.
But now we are a big exporter. It doesn't mean that you know how to do it. It only says that you export a lot. If I look at the statistics, Malaysia, you export a lot of solar panel. That's what people can read. But it doesn't really tell you that, Malaysians, we are very, very good at making solar panel. So that's case number one. And the other one is the Alliance Steel plant in MCKIP, right? Which is along the route for the ECRL. So I don't know how much you know about the steel industry of Malaysia.
Not much, but yes.
We are not known as a big player. We are not known as a big player. And after the Chinese came, Alliance Steel, the statistics suddenly look very good.
So you see, that's what I'm trying to piece here, right? Because on one hand, you said earlier on that the BRI is not, there's not much like what they promise and what actually transpires. It's quite a bit of a gap. But what I'm seeing in Malaysia is that it's not quite the case, right? Because we have gotten a lot of tangible benefits.
We have, and that's largely because of the structure of the economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you look at long-term trends, we're talking about 50 years and 60 years.
Yeah.
In Southeast Asia, generally most of us are pro-trade, pro-investments one, right?
Yeah, correct.
Generally speaking.
It's just how the one that seems... Yeah.
As in, we also don't go around and pick fights internationally. We don't really like to do things like that. So the one that does it the best is Singapore, right? I think no one will argue against that, right? Who is the number two?
I think it's...
Put aside personal feelings. I
would like to think it is, in recent times, definitely Indonesia. But if you take since independence, I would say us. but recent times Indonesia.
Yes, yes, that's the perception.
Right.
That's the perception, because if you look at the structure of the economy, right? We were doing rubber, cocoa, tin, right?
Back in the
Today you're
day.
doing semicon, right? So in that sense, you need the milieu. The milieu is very, very important,
Yeah.
and that helps in fostering trade and investment. Whether the other side is Chinese or Japanese or German, right? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter to us, lah.
Right. So wait, so are we second place? Just to confirm.
I think overall, if you take the long term, I would still say that we are second place because, frankly, the thing about Indonesia is that for a long time they didn't do so well. I don't know how old you are, but
Yeah.
I can tell you how old I am. I'm in my late 30s. And during the 1997 Asian financial crisis,
Yeah.
right?
It was yeah.
The current PM was the MOF, right? The current PM was the MOF. So if you remember that period, you remember the $1, the $1 to 3.81 peg, right? I think you probably remember that. 1 to 3.81.
3.8 the
81.
Mahathir,
81.
81. Okay.
There's
yes,
a 1
yes.
behind. There's a 3.81.
Yeah.
I remember that number very well because that was how we fixed the peg.
Yeah.
And if you remember of course, there was a lot of confusion and all those things, right? And if you look at what happened around us, we were quite sheltered. And the Indonesians, you really pity them. The growth really went like this, yeah. It went like this, and
I mean,
it
there
did
were
not come out like
riots
this
and
after.
there was like violence all over. I still remember.
Yes, and that lasted quite some time. And then they had this part where the leadership was not certain, right? So the post-Suharto years was not so kind to them.
Yes.
And people stayed away and all those. And you easily lost 4 years, right? So in that sense, right, if you look at it over a longer period, I don't really think that they have it better than us. I mean, they may give the impression that they're more pro-business and all those. And I think a lot of it is also down to personal leadership, right? I think the Jokowi has his own brand of own way
Yeah.
of doing things, and kudos to him. But if you look over the long run, I think those are very long years. To lose 4 years, it is a long time. To lose
Yeah.
3-4 years, and the stigma associated with it is actually quite bad. And let's not forget there was this part where there was JW Marriott bombing as well, in downtown Jakarta.
There was also a mini diaspora of Indonesian Chinese because of the racial element, right, of all the suffering, right?
Oh yes.
I want to get your thoughts on the reopening to China because, like, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing, right? Because your area of expertise is in FDIs, and one of the big issues that Malaysia always have with, whether it's warranted or not, I don't know. But I know one thing that Malaysians always complain is that the government's not doing enough for FDIs and things like that. But I see that up north in Penang and all that, they're still getting all the Intel deals and all that. So what is your assessment of the FDI situation in Malaysia? And then maybe share your thoughts a little bit about the China reopening later.
I think if you look at, again, long run, and if you talk to people, we're talking about the factory guys, the long-term FDI guy, as well as the fund manager guys, right? The portfolio side guys. Generally, they have pretty good things to say about the country, in the sense that, well, our government is quite generous in giving incentives. We are quite generous, probably too generous, but anyway. The other thing is that the labor force is fairly competent. And the location is good, infrastructure is good, right? Our highways are, I don't think anywhere else you can get better highways than us. Singapore one don't count that.
They're a tiny area. I mean, Singapore, the thing about people comparing Malaysia to Singapore is that, look, Singapore is a city-state. Yes. It's a tiny area. You can't compare Malaysia when it's a lot bigger. But yes, I digress. Continue.
Yes, so they have gotten fairly good deals. And how to say, the other thing that is often behind our heads, we don't really talk about it, is that the currency actually is very stable. The ringgit, the
Okay.
ringgit has never suffered, like the Indonesia case, the rupiah suffers a panic attacks one.
Yeah.
Malaysia, very small scale panic attack. I don't even call it panic attack. You say you go and wait for 1 month and come back, you'll be fine. Malaysia, we never had that sort of problem. And investors, they like that. They like that certainty. But the problem that they face now is that, hey, what you're doing can be replicated quite easily by someone in the Mekong states, right? Vietnam can do what you want. You can give people tax breaks. I can give people tax breaks, right? You can give this part where you can hire expat at a normal rates, right? I can do that also. It's not that difficult to do whatever that you're doing, right? So, and the other thing is that these guys are still cheaper than you.
Yes.
So what worked well for you in the 90s may not work well for you today, right? And that's where the middle income trap thing comes in, where people feel that, hey, are we doing not enough, stuff like that.
So how do we break past this, I guess, from your point of view?
That is a middle income trap argument, right?
Right.
That is another throwback to the PM Najib era. He did spend quite a lot of effort in raising awareness of the middle income trap and dedicating a team to it. So if you really look at it, let's not talk about Malaysia first. We just talk about who broke through the middle income trap in recent decades. We just talk about Asia only. Korea, Taiwan. Well, this one is a bit disputed because in the sense that it's not really a country. We just say, territory.
Yes.
Hong Kong, which also territory types, right?
And Japan, where
Singapore,
right? Yeah.
Japan doesn't really count because you were already quite advanced by the 50s and 60s.
That's true.
So you cannot really count Japan.
Okay, fair enough. Singapore, yes.
Yes, you cannot count Brunei, right?
Yeah, that one's a cheat code there of oil, and very few people.
Yeah, you cannot count Brunei, right? Yeah. Can you count Macau?
Macau is again territory.
So you're left with very, very little already, So I'm not saying that stay there is good, right? Because it's not that good in the sense that you are squeezed on both ends. On one hand, you cannot compete against the Swedish, right, the Austrians or the Koreans. But on the other hand, you're squeezed by Ethiopia, Ghana, Cambodia, and Vietnam, right? So that's where you are in. And if you look at, you stretch the sample size, it looks even more depressing because who else have really made it over the last 50 years? It's very, very little. Very, very little. Right? In Latin America, only maybe Chile. But Chile, yes, you can say that it has the same issue as Brunei in the sense that you were born rich. You were born rich and, they don't even have a very complex industry. Yeah?
Will you say in your assessment, right, that of all the quote-unquote middle-income nations in the region, Malaysia has the best chance? Well, first of all, I think we are closest. When you look at some of our per capita income, we are already. I think the number for middle income is about $15,000 a year, right? And I think right now we are at 12, something like that. So we are quite close in a sense. I think I personally thought PM Najib got pretty close to it, but of course we all know what happened after that. Do you think we are best positioned among all the Asian nations that could break into this quote unquote first world sort of country?
I think most of us will not make it. I would say very, very little, right. And we'll probably have the highest chance because you're nearest.
Yes.
Simply because you are the nearest to it, right? So you automatically think that, hey, that guy would be the nearest.
Yes.
But the reality is that the 15,000 thing, the yardstick changes every 1 or 2 years. The World Bank revises it.
Yes.
And prior to that, they don't even have the lower middle income and higher middle income. Now they have both, probably to make you feel better about yourself. But
now they have two.
You are higher middle. And I don't know whether you realize this or not. Around us, the cluster around you, the cluster around you is China, right? In some years China is higher, some years is lower, right? Because this depends a lot on currency exchange also,
Of
which
course.
explains why it's so important to keep it stable. So China was for a few years it was lower, for a few years it was low,
Now it's
and
about
now it's
same or
quite
higher
low.
already.
Depending on
Yeah.
IMF or
Correct.
World Bank, depending who you use.
Yes, correct.
But the other thing, minus away the Chinese, because it's hard to compete against them. Those people that were clustered around you are Russia, Argentina, Brazil, Poland, and all these guys. Czech was too far away already, and Chile, right? So if you look at this, all of us have fairly good natural resources, but not strong enough manufacturing, right? Which means that the crux of the issue here is manufacturing. Because guess what? The Koreans and the Taiwanese don't have a lot of natural resources, right? Kimchi don't count, boy bands don't count. That was much later. Boy bands came much later.
Yeah.
So they have manufacturing to push through it, and those who don't have it don't have manufacturing to go
so
to really push through that.
So how do we solve, how do we solve this manufacturing, moving up the manufacturing line, and then, or B, should we even rely on the manufacturing line? Because, I mean, if you look at Singapore, Singapore like 15%, only about 15% of the economy, I believe, is manufacturing, right? So what are your proposed solutions for this?
I don't see any way out if you don't have a strong manufacturing sector, right?
I see.
You can do like the Indians. We jump straight to services and you do it. No one has ever done it before and have become rich, except for Seychelles and all those guys, right?
Right.
There is no historical precedent for it, right? And guess who's making a very strong move at it is the Chinese. And even then you could argue that the Chinese don't have, but they don't have strong manufacturing industry either.
Okay. Well, okay. You know what? Maybe expand a little bit on that, because I think when people think China, they think manufacturing, but what you're suggesting is that they're not strong.
They're not strong. Who said they were strong?
Okay. Yeah, explain. No, I'm very interested. Yeah, explain what do you mean.
Okay. I give you an analogy.
Okay.
Can you name an item that you were consumer goods? You don't go and buy the producer goods like tractor and all. Don't count. We're talking about just consumer goods.
Okay.
Can you name me a Chinese branded consumer good that you're willingly going to hold and is actually proud of it, and that you want to show off to other people because you feel good about it?
Feel good, I think it's a bit hard, but usage, I would have to say that has been increasing. Like the TV that I'm looking at right now, that is a Xiaomi TV. I use TikTok's not really a good lah. It's a service, it's an app. I don't use any Huawei phones or all that. Not that I can, even if I wanted to. China brands, yeah, you're right. I guess they're not there yet, I guess. Or am I right to say that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, because I use a Xiaomi, but that's because in Japan it's very hard to buy dual SIM phones like Malaysia. Most people will sell you dual SIM phone. Japan very difficult one. Japan very difficult to get things like that. Unless you go and buy a clone phone or from Hong Kong, those type.
Right.
But generally they don't have strong manufacturing powerhouses, to be very fair, at least in the consumer part. Maybe if you look at the producer good tractor, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can get that, right? Maybe you can get that. And it's very, very difficult. And the reality is that the Chinese only entered this so-called global value chain / global production network, right? Only by 1979, because of Deng Xiaoping. And even then, they had to go and fight a war with the Vietnamese at the same time.
Yeah.
So they did two things at the same time. So the fact that you entered late, you want to make TV. Remember those days got JVC, right? The one that sponsored Arsenal, JVC. Sharp sponsor Man U.
Yes.
Right? That time, Samsung was not famous yet.
Yes.
Samsung was not famous for TVs and all those yet. And then only you have higher, right? And then you have the case of computers, the one that I was talking about, computers, right? Because in the 90s, Dell was like the Huawei of today, right?
Yeah.
It was high tech and you wanted to have a Dell. And then they started Legend / Lenovo, right? And then you go and buy IBM. And as of today, Lenovo, it's a famous company, but most of its market share is in China.
Yeah, and when you say you have a Lenovo, people know that you. I mean, it's cheap lah. That's what people associate it with, right?
Lenovo, I'm not sure because I use an Asus Taiwanese.
Okay.
But the point I'm
Yeah.
trying to make is that it's so difficult to have a manufacturing powerhouse, right? And it's because it's so spliced up, right? If you just look at your computers, those days when we still had Hewlett Packard, Compaq, and all those, and there was a time I think some people mistook that Intel and Microsoft was the same company because they always come together. But it's not. It's spliced up, right?
That's true.
It's spliced up.
Pentium 4.
Yeah, the 386, right? Those days, 386.
Yeah.
The 386 or
Pentium 2
the
with
thing.
Yeah. I always thought they were the same thing, but actually they're not. So how did like the Koreans and the Taiwanese do it then? And I guess if we were to go, we would look at these guys, right? Because they are countries of somewhat similar. What's the word? Similar population, right? Obviously, we have a multiracial society. They don't have, but yeah, how did they do it? I would imagine that we will look to these guys, right, as reference points.
I don't think you could possibly replicate it, right? Because these two economies were born out of the Cold War, right? This was Cold War era, and the time doing a TikTok, doing an ESG, you could do a lot of things and really get away with it.
Interesting point.
And that included lack of democracy. You probably know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, lack of democracy / human rights.
Point, yes.
Yeah, lack of democracy, lack of human rights. And the other thing was, I don't know how often you go to Korea, Taiwan, or China, but it's very hard to find money changer one. It's very hard to find money changer.
Is it on purpose or?
Because these are people who have closed capital accounts. And FDI do not really like that.
Of course. Makes sense.
Yeah. And Malaysia is very, very easy to get money lender, right? It's not even a challenge. You go out, you can find it, right?
Yes. Every
like the whole street you have.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, now that you mention it, yeah, every mall has a money lender, right? Has a money exchange. Right.
Yes. More than one. At least one.
Yeah.
At least one.
Yeah.
At least one.
Only tiny malls have one, I guess. Wow.
Yeah.
So then I think as an extension, I have to ask you then, how do you, because you are in the country where you're at now, Tokyo, Japan, we have this, a lot of our economy is modeled after the Japanese, right? The famous Look East policy. Do you agree that we should still be adopting that kind of mentality?
I'm not sure whether our economy was modeled after the Japanese. I think we were modeled after the British.
Okay.
I think we were modeled after the British. And the Japanese Look East policy officially never ended, right? It was like a vision, right? It was like the vision. So it never really ended. And I think when Tun M and his team came to Japan in the 80s and the 90s, although they largely spend their time in Japan, they also look at other samples, right? But what we did during that era, and I think you have to throw back, you look at Renong Group, right? Yeah. Privatization of TNB and so on and so forth, right?
The early 90s, yep.
We were actually doing the Korean model, the chaebol, the vertically integrated model.
Okay.
We were actually doing that model without even realizing it. Even that's the better part. We're not even realizing it. Because for a long time, Japan, you cannot organize your company in a pyramidal form. It was prohibited for quite a long time. It was probably so we came to Japan but really learned what the Koreans did.
Right. I think what a lot of Malaysians, and I would say probably the Malaysian Chinese community feels is like, back in the day, whether it's football or manufacturing, we were sort of neck and neck with the Taiwanese and the Koreans. And of course, the currency was similar with Singapore and things like that. And over time, we feel like we are being left behind. So I guess, do you think that those feelings are legitimate, meaning it's reasonable for us to have that because we had the opportunity to do it? Or do you feel like these other countries had certain advantages that we didn't have, and that's why they are ahead of us?
I think that answer can be answered using the
Yeah.
points that you mentioned, right? Because they had other things that you didn't have, and you had other things that they didn't have, right?
Yeah.
But I think losing to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, or Singapore is no shame, right? There's no shame in losing to these guys, right? Because everyone else loses to them, right? But really, if you look at against Thailand, against this guy Indonesia, then I think you not only preserve your lead, you actually increase the lead. You actually increase the lead. So in that sense, you don't do too badly. And I don't know how much you know about Mexico, because I was just talking to my wife about Mexico
Okay.
recently. For a very long time, when you watch American movies, right, Mexico is portrayed not in a very positive light,
And
right?
then it's always orange in
Sicario,
color. Mexico is always very orange.
dusty, rusty,
Yes,
type, right? But actually,
correct.
it's not. Mexico is long. It's super, super long, and he has very interesting flora and fauna, right? It is super, super interesting. And the other thing is that, guess what? The GDP for capita for Mexico is actually quite high.
Yes.
Not as high as us, but higher than Thailand.
That's true.
Than Thailand. And they have the same problem as you in the sense that they manufacture a lot of things, but it's Levi's jeans, Nissan cars, things that they don't have propriety over, things that the Western and the Japanese and increasingly the Koreans have propriety over, right? So in that sense, that is probably your proper benchmark. And when I was young, I remember Mexico was higher than us, GDP per capita. And now we are quite far ahead of Mexico already.
I know Latin American countries are also very blessed, right? I think the case study people always bring up is Argentina. In the 50s, they were like the second highest in the world. And then they just fell up. But hey, at least they got 3 World Cups, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm hearing from you is that actually we are on a pretty good trajectory, as in, given what we have, we shouldn't be expecting more. Is that, am I right to say that? For Malaysia?
If you look at long run, then there's a limit to what you can achieve. And to break through like Korea or Taiwan, you really have to pay a very high price, right? And some of the price that is paid by the Koreans was, I don't know whether you know or not, but until the 80s, mid and late 80s, almost all the banks in Korea are government owned. And which means that you have no Maybank, no public bank, no Hong Leong Bank, no CIMB or whatever version behind it. And the other thing is that when you have things like that, the government actually induces financial repression, which means that your 1 won is going to be worth a lot less, and you have to work very, very hard to get $1. And of course, they juice it up to get export, and that's how they build up Hyundai, POSCO, and all those. But for the average Korean, even until today, their life is not as nice as us. You go out, you buy one nasi lemak, right? One nasi kandar. Maybe the guy overcharged you, but the point is, for a long time, even until Korea, is not that comfortable, right? Not everyone dresses up in nice suit with a tie. Uses nice handphone, right? Not everyone gets to do that. And remember this.
Yeah, correct. Sorry, continue.
And this country suffered really badly during the IMF period. It was quite bad for them, and we didn't have to suffer through it. We suffered in another way, but not in the manner that it did.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up, because that's my next thing, right? I think one of the big things that I'm trying to get Malaysians to understand also is that, yes, for sure, you might see that we are not earning as much, and then of course there's always Singapore there to compare and things like that, and their per capita income is like what, 65, 66,000, whatever it is. But the example I always like to give is that, hey, maybe instead of just assessing how much money you make, also figure out that the cost of living, right? And you're in Japan right now. So maybe, right, for Malaysians, give people a sense of what the cost of living is in Japan versus Malaysia?
They're not easy to compare, right? Because
Yes.
Japan has been in not high inflation for quite some time until recently but that is almost like acts of God already
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
right? So the cost of living because of that has been quite they have been managed quite well, and the one thing that Japan seems to keep the price very constant is actually eggs.
Hmm.
Eggs. I think how many years? I think 10 years or more haven't increased the price already. Yeah. So that is another consideration, right? Because of course how much you earn minus how much you spend, so on and so forth, right? And the other thing is that Malaysia is actually, in terms of tax, right? Uh, we still don't have the VAT lah, right? VAT slash GST, and how you're gonna run without that is it's not easy to answer that, but in Japan and a lot of countries people have that, and that kind of increases the cost lah, right? And the other thing is for the case of Malaysia, right, is a lot of items are price controlled, right? Cooking oil,
Petrol.
salt, sugar, petrol. I think there's two, right? One is control, one is not control, or something like that lah, right?
Correct.
So if you add those things together, that artificially pushes down the price. And the other thing is that this ties back down to currency exchange. The reality is that the BNM is very, very competent in
Yep.
keeping inflation under control. Although some people may not believe that, but it's true. It's true. And those figures are very, very hard to fudge. And the other thing is that the currency, if your inflation is so high, your currency, you sure suffer. Right? And it's not unique. I've never gone to a country where people say, hey, the price is so cheap and we are so happy. Yeah. Apart from Japanese eggs. Apart from Japanese eggs.
You know, one of the things that I have to thank BNM for is them being very rational on the interest rates hike. Because I think globally, especially the US, they were hiking, right? Singapore was hiking, everybody was hiking. And so naturally, the pressure on the ringgit will happen. And it did, right? 4.15 to 4.8, right? At the high. Today's 4.4 years drop. And the reason they didn't do that is because of inflation. It was relatively curbed. I think our inflation is at 3% only, compared to the US, right, which was at the peak 9%. So they were rational and they were firm in not raising rates. They could have easily succumbed to that pressure. And so I have to give them that credit. And yeah, I guess going back to the discussion on FDIs, right? Now that China is reopening, what's it like? What's your sense on what's happening?
I think we will. I think we will, in the sense that what attracted Japanese or Western businesses to Malaysia are also equally appealing, if not more, to the Chinese, right? So that's one good thing. And the other thing is that I think the Malaysian government, right, is we're generally very savvy in playing this international game. I know we don't give enough credit to them.
Okay, interesting.
We are actually a very respected international player.
Okay.
You go to a lot of places, even until today in Japan, people still know who Mahathir is, They don't call Mahathir, they cannot spell Mahathir, they say Mahathir. Until today, so that tells you we have done certain things very well. We have done certain things super, super well, and this is one of it. And the Chinese, I think, how to put it, they value that as well. They value that as well. And I know at a very high level, you can say that we have some maritime disagreements, but those can be dealt separately. And I think people appreciate that. I know some ASEAN states may not be so, how to say, they may be more adamant, right? But I don't think Malaysia is one of them. So for that, you're going to get some.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, there's also pent-up demand. And that is only good for us.
And do you think that the fact that we have probably the largest Chinese population in ASEAN Do you think that helps? Definitely.
I think it might help, but not so directly. Yeah?
Oh, interesting.
Because
Okay.
at the end, of the day, right? You're probably ethnic Chinese, right? I'm judging based on your face,
Yeah,
lah,
I
right?
am. I am. I am. Yeah.
So, if that is the case, right? You don't actively think that you are part of the diaspora, and even if you are, there's no direct linkage, direct material linkage, right? I mean, some of us may not even speak the language, and even if we did, uh, you know, the beliefs are different, right? So in that sense, I don't think I think it might be a tick box, but I don't think it's like the make or break, right? The make or break at the end of the day is your climate good, right? Do you have a stable exchange rate, right? Number one, and by extension, right? Do you have predictable policy environment? And I think Malaysia is actually quite predictable, which means that it's very hard to move away from middle income trap lah, because it's predictable,
Yeah.
right? Once you're breaking out of it means that you're not predictable already, yeah. So that's another thing. We have that, and infrastructure is good, right? For the most part, at least in Peninsula, is quite good. Uh, Political stability, although you can say that we used to be ranked higher, but there's also another debate, right? You want to be more democratic,
Yeah.
right? Then this is probably the price that you have to pay, lah. And that's not a bad thing. The Koreans went through it again. Don't forget that the Koreans went through it. Just that theirs coincided with an economic crisis, lah, right? The Indonesians went through it, also coincided with that, right? So we are quite lucky that we transitioned minus away the economic crisis. Because if you had to handle two of them at the same time, that's not going to be very pleasant.
So looking forward with the FDI right now, right? What are some of the industries you think that, based on Malaysia's policies, or that will be the most attractive to not just the Chinese but to foreign investors for that matter?
Like you mentioned, is the semicon, right? The
Mm-hmm.
semicon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, we are largely in APT, right? We are only in assembly packaging testing.
Yes.
We have some EMS player. I think it was covered in some of your programs
Yes.
prior to this.
Correct. Correct.
But our EMS are not of the same nature as Foxconn, right? You're both EMS, but their EMS can shake the world. Ours cannot.
We are
Ours
tiny,
cannot.
small e, small e,
We are
small e.
super
They are
super
big
small.
e.
Well, but the fact is, because of the trade war, there's some distortion, right? And you're gonna benefit quite a bit. In fact, we have benefited quite a bit. I don't know. I think you might have covered this company,
Oh yeah,
Steel
yeah.
Terra Dagang Next. For a long time, what I know is that we've been trying to sell it, right? And there was Foxconn, XFAB, all these guys came in, and eventually a mainland Chinese consortium was chosen. Correct me if I'm not wrong. It was a
Yeah.
mainland Chinese consortium.
Correct. Correct.
So if you just judge it based on one single case, right, you must be hugely successful, right? Because prior to that, we had so much trouble finding people to buy it. And you could use the same example and extrapolate it to Proton.
Geely, yeah.
Why doesn't anyone talk about Proton?
Yeah.
They are also bought by Chinese.
And the cars are amazing actually. Ever since they took
It's a
over.
rebadging, right? They
Yeah.
pay in the form of rebadging.
Yeah. Okay. So I think enough about Malaysia. I know you also have a lot of interest in the region, specifically Indonesia. What are some of the trends you can maybe educate us Malaysians about that you're seeing in the region that are important?
What kind of trends are we talking about?
FDI trends, policy trends, things like that.
I would say how to put it this way, yeah. If you look at the stars, the so-called stars, right? There's only two stars, right? What's his name? Indonesia and Vietnam, right?
Vietnam, yes.
So if you look at what they have been doing, they've been getting the headlines, like the Vietnam, because a lot of these guys, they want to diversify their supply chain, therefore they choose Vietnam, right? And before we before we clap hands and say anything, right, is that the reality is that the Vietnamese, and by extension the Indonesians, for many years they've been pushing reforms And these reforms are sometimes super confusing because 2 steps forward, 1 step back, those kind of things, right? But overall, there is progress. And when there is progress and there is suddenly, hey, Foxconn wants to go to Vietnam because, you want to, shelter yourself away from all these trade wars, the Vietnamese were ready, right? So in that sense, it's you shouldn't judge based on one event or two events. It's based on years and years of hard work. And the other in Malay we say this is not durian runtuh, the durian fall down thing. And the same goes for Indonesia because when Jokowi came into power, he benchmarked a lot of things. In the sense that we want to be more pro business, therefore we benchmark to WEF, World Bank, and all those things, TI, right? Very similar to what Najib did. Very similar to what Najib did. So all these are quite consistent. And when it comes to China, right, what I know is that the Indonesians, they set up dedicated China desk, which guess what? Malaysia, we do it too. So in a sense, we are also doing the same things, but because people are doing the same things at the lower base, that's why you can feel it much bigger, right?
When you compare Vietnam and Indonesia, what are some of the key differences, and also who you put if you had to invest in only one country? Where will you put your money?
Well, it depends on which stock, right?
Yes, of course. But suppose let's say there was an ETF, right? You could buy the index fund of Indonesia or Vietnam. Which one would you put and why?
I would go to Vietnam simply because they have taken quite a lot of beating. But the other thing about Vietnam is that it's a closed financial system. So you and I cannot go and buy. You go to the CGS, CIMB and say, hey, you want to buy share, Vietnam share, people, they'll politely say cannot, right? So it's quite difficult to buy that. Indonesia, you can. And the next question is which sector, which industry, which company. It goes back down to the FIRL starter kit, right?
Yeah.
Which one do you look at?
Yes.
So
yes.
and the other thing that worries me about all this chest thumping or whatnot is that if you look at Vietnam, is suffering the same problems that we face today. The younger version, they are the younger version of us. And why do I say that is because, well, again, go back to the brands, the part where you pick a Chinese brand that you want to show off, and consumer goods, not services. You can extend that to most Southeast Asian economies, and you would still struggle to pick a manufactured item. Indonesia, you only have Indomie, right? Consumer good. And Indomie, probably Shin Ramen will look better.
Indonesian?
I think it might be, but the other Indomie was under the Salim Group. The Salim Group used to own the BCA, and then after the financial crisis, it changed hands.
Yeah.
Right. And for Malaysia, apart from Top Glove, Supermax, but you cannot say that, Top Glove is a consumer good, right? Until recently, it was not.
No. We don't have manufactured brands. We are more B2B instead of B2C. I think the closest big name brand is AirAsia, and then I'm going to shamelessly claim Grab. But they are not. Their services they're not manufactured goods.
So you don't really have. And guess what? The Vietnamese suffer from the same problem. But these problems are not obvious when your GDP per capita is only, I think, 3,009, about Philippines level. They exceeded Philippines, I think, last year. And it's not obvious when you are at the low level, but it becomes harder and harder to generate that 1 ounce of growth. And if you look at Vietnam, you look at they only had the renovation doi moi thing in 1986. 1986. So if you look at that part and today, more than 20 years, almost 40 years, the high growth period was from 1986 to Asian financial crisis. And then growth secular slowdown until then it picked up until Lehman Brothers, and then they got hit really badly, and now it's picking up. But if you look at the moving average, it's getting lower and lower, right? But still higher than us. That's why we feel the pain, lah. So speaking, we feel the
Yeah.
pain, we feel being slighted. But is it even proper to compare them to us?
Yeah.
And
I think, I
and
mean, it's a problem of the entire region also, right? Because even for Singapore, there's no manufactured brands out of there, unless you consider the Razer, the computer Razer mouse lah. I guess that's one. Popiah Skin, they're pretty famous Popiah Skin, but that's about it, right?
I think Singapore, in the sense that well, there's Creative lah, the late founder recently, right? But that company has not been active for in a significant way for some time. But if you look at Singapore, right, you could say that maybe in very isolated cases like the Singapore Technologies lah, right? Singapore Technologies, right? Maybe they have that, but the thing is that no matter how, right, the manufacturing sector is not as weak as what we think. If you look at Singapore, if I'm not wrong, about 18 or 20% for quite some time, manufacturing is that big amount.
Yes.
And what they don't have in indigenous, they go and plug. They go and plug from like Bio Valley. If you go to NUS around the area, there's the Bio Valley. And there's also, can poach grab from you. Why not?
Yeah.
I can poach grab from you. But those are not manufacturing, of course.
Yeah.
Right? You could even say that if you stretch the argument, you could even say that Lee Kuan Yew was poached from you.
Yeah. He's born in Johor.
If you stretch the argument, right, it cannot end one, or the argument
yeah.
cannot end. So if you look at it that way, right, the Southeast Asians, we developed based on open trade, fairly open to FDI, and because of that, right, you cannot really push whatever the Koreans did, right? Oh, you have financial repression. I don't think Johnson and Johnson, or I don't know, Cadbury is gonna love that, man.
Yeah.
They're gonna complain and go to your minister of trade and basically make your life very difficult, right?
One of the things, because at the end of the day, most of the people complaining about life, or rather, this kind of comparisons, the kind of people that are making it are usually the Malaysian Chinese. But I don't know if you've done the math on this. I actually had an article, maybe I can send you personally later. But with the assumption of the Malaysian Chinese dominating 70% of the Malaysian economy, what that translates to is Japan levels of GDP per capita for a Malaysian Chinese. Meaning, we earn as much as the average Japanese, but we don't pay as much as the average Japanese in terms of living costs. And so life is in fact a lot better in that sense for a Malaysian Chinese. It's just that when we get lumped up with everything else, then of course it looks lower. So yeah, I just thought I bring that up. And the last thing I want to ask you about is actually Japan. Japan is in a very unique situation. I remember one of your papers, you were assessing how Japan should behave in the world of US-China preeminence, something to that extent, right? So being in Japan right now, what can you share with us? What's happening on the ground? And how does Japan sees itself, at least going forward in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think Japan, right, if you look at the statistics,
yeah,
if you pick 1995 and today, right, you're going to be so disappointed because the GDP per capita of today is less than 1995, right? But everyone got smashed during that period. To be perfectly fair, everyone got smashed, but the recovery was quite uneven for many of us. And it's just that the Japanese at 1995 was probably super advanced. I don't think people will forget that, right? That when your parents asked you to go and buy a TV, what they were saying was buying JVC, Sharp, or something to that. Or Sony, Sony. How can I forget Sony? Yeah. So that was the peak of it, and guess what? They're still very, very strong, right? In industries like cars, right? You go to most Asian countries, most cars that you see are Japanese, right? Most cars and motorbikes, right? Before I forget, motorbikes. And if you look at EV, if you just look at EV, right? the Toyota guys launched the Mirai. Mirai means future. Mirai means future. So the Mirai is hydrogen fuel cell. In my opinion, is more stable than EV lah.
Okay,
But people
okay.
don't count it as EV. And the thing is, people don't even talk about Mirai is because you probably don't even know who the CEO is, like, because the CEO keeps quiet most of the time. But you will know Tesla and all
Yeah,
those guys.
yeah.
Yeah, you cannot even name the CEO of Samsung
I
or
cannot. I
Honda. You
cannot.
cannot because they
The
don't talk a
Lee
lot. And
family.
even if they
Yeah.
did,
Yeah.
and even if they did, we wouldn't understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's another thing. So they are still strong in these areas. And the other thing that people don't really talk about is recently there was the BOJ governor, Kuroda-san.
Mm-hmm.
He tweaked the yield curve control YCC thing, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which means that what has happened is that the interest rate in Japan has gone up de facto gone up. And that is consequential to a lot of us because these guys are big investors. Whether you're talking about factories or portfolio, these guys are big. And some money will go back there. How much, we're not sure. We're not actually sure how much is going back there. So they are still consequential in that sense. But you would say that the 90s was a more easy place to live in because, for a lot of global investors, or even someone like Bill Clinton, you want to go to Asia, you only need to talk to Japan can already. Just talk to the Japanese can already. But today is so much different, so much different, and and it is more multipolar lah. You can say that it's
Yeah.
more multipolar, but at the same time, I think these advantages are not so easily taken away. I don't believe that. No, I don't think anyone can challenge Uniqlo. No, come to think about it, no one can really deliver to you at the same speed, same cutting, same efficiency as Uniqlo
Mm-hmm.
or Muji. Yeah? But we don't consciously think of them as, oh, Japanese, right? So I think that they have some advantages. It's just that all these strong companies, they tend to be very, very international. The weaker ones, we probably won't even talk about them, right? But they create a drag on the economy. But in the very, very leading edge one, I think they will still be very, very consequential.
Interesting. Interesting. So, to sum up, right? What is your big message to the Malaysian investor? I think today we are seeing we are reaching the pre-pandemic lows in terms of participation in the stock market for Malaysia. Certainly, the mood on the ground is due to many factors, inflation, government, stuff like that. Mood is not so good. What's your message to Malaysian investors? If you could tell them one message.
You mean portfolio, right? Portfolio.
Yeah, for the investor lah, for their own money. Should they stay on? Should they? What should they do?
I don't know because I watched FIRL for quite some time, so I'm a bit biased.
Okay.
But what I know is that wealth usually are made in incremental steps. They're not. You're not going to like execute 50% profit, 2x profit. You may do that once in a while, but not so often. You're more likely to make money along incremental steps, right? And sometimes they pay you dividend good, no? So in that sense, if you are disciplined and not easily swayed by rumors or sentiment, right, then it should be okay. That is my take. But that's because I adopt a very, very conservative strategy.
Sure. Okay. All right, man. This is simple but very good advice. And Guanie, thanks for coming on the pod. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's seldom I get to speak to a Malaysian all the way from Japan. And actually, fun fact for you, the last time I was in Japan, 2010, myself and my family, we were on a tour guide. And we were on a tour, and the tour guide was from Penang. Can you believe it?
Oh, yes. I believe that. I
really,
believe that.
There's a lot of Malaysian tour guides that are in Japan. I don't know.
Yes.
Really, yeah?
Yeah, that was the period where the yen was so expensive. This was Lehman Brothers. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, at the time the sentiment was different. Japan was the safe haven. So the Japan yen shot up.
Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and the GDP per capita also shot up. So between 1995 to 2022, there was a lot of things that happened. So one of it, you see the mountain was the Lehman period. It's like boom, it went up.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, man, Guanie, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And guys, hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, Guanie, if someone wants to find you, where they can find you, do you want to be found at all, actually?
There's my email. My email. I have a LinkedIn, which I use LinkedIn because I don't like Facebook because I got hacked and I don't have a very
Oof.
happy experience with Facebook ever
Fair
since
enough.
I got hacked.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
But LinkedIn,
people just
I have
type in
LinkedIn.
Guanie Lim, lah, correct? Okay, guys, you heard it there. And yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. As usual, follow us on YouTube, Spotify, the usual stuff. Let us know, right? If you like this sort of content, comments or wherever. And guys, hope to see you in the next pod. Bye-bye.